Welcome to the Slow Wine Guide 2021. I'm here with winemaker Joe Nielsen from Ramsgate Winery. Welcome, Joe.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. We're here to look at the three wines that will be featured in the 2021 guide, and we've got a very interesting wine to kick off. In fact, one of the very few from Northern California. Why don't you tell us about it, Joe?
Sure. So the first wine we're going to try is the 2019 Ramsgate Pinot Blanc. This Pinot Blanc is grown and made on site here in Carneros on our estate property, which consists of 27 acres of 6 different varieties. So the inspiration here for this wine was partly, it's a cold area for growing grapes. And when the owners planted back in 2009, 2010, they were inspired by cooler climate varietals, which included Pinot Blanc. And so the vines now are, 10 plus years old. I think they're starting to come into their own, and very pretty. I think I said to you pre this tasting, this is sort of like a snowflake in the sense that it's light and gentle, but look under a microscope and it's super complex. Lots going on underneath the surface, which I really like in a light white wine.
The intensity of this wine is just outstanding. I mean, I swear it must have a really high amount of dry extract in it because it's got this density to it that it's phenomenal. And Anderson Valley is usually well known for these types of cooler climate varieties. It's just an exemplary example in my opinion.
Thank you. Yeah, I've always, as a wine consumer, loved high acid wines of France, Italy, and Germany. So given the opportunity as a winemaker, this is my opportunity to really dive into that sort of vein of winemaking. So the wine is made up of 3 different selections of Pinot Blanc. So not only is Pinot Blanc not widely planted in Northern California, there's not a lot of options if you were to make a Pinot Blanc. Yet at our estate property, we have over 4 acres of 3 different types of Pinot Blanc. So shades of stone fruit, I would say. So 3 selections. One's coming from Visita from a pretty famous vineyard in Central Coast, and then Beringer and Etude, both who have been in the winemaking scene for decades. So they all bring a little bit of something different to the table. The Visita ripens first, is the highest elevation on our property. We're not very high elevation to begin with, but it's at the top of our hill, and that's coming off, and it's super, super flavorful. I get more like tangerine and white peach. And then as you go down the hill, you get a little bit, you even kind of said dry extract. I get a phenol feel on the palate that I feel like as it goes down the hill, things ripen a little bit slower. We're getting tons of flavor development, but the sugar is always pretty modest. So by the time we're at the bottom of the hill, even though I might wait 2 weeks to pick, I'm still picking around 20 and a half to 21 bricks. But the hang time, and we talked about this this tasting, on our estate, we're looking at 50 sometimes days of post-veraison of hang time and picking at 21 bricks. So the time from 15 to 21 over a 50-day period is extremely slow.
Well, you've talked a little bit about your winemaking. Now, you're foot stomping this great. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I think when people think Pinot Blanc, it can be sort of the Granny Smith apple, tart, but not, very complex or have texture. I think most people think of almost like Vermentino. It's straight. It's a laser
linear. Yeah.
And so by foot stomping, we're hoping to sort of play a little bit more to texture, but also get a little bit more flavor out of the skins. And being down in Carneros, what we've noticed is on our ranch especially, the skins are so thick because of the wind, and I think also that hang time, that there's just so much flavor I feel like we're losing out on by just doing a quick press and being done with it. So by foot stomping, we're increasing our skin contact by maybe a half a day.
Yeah, you haven't lost a molecule. You got
No.
it all in there.
And that's a personal attribute of mine. I like to not waste.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a stunner, a real stunner. Okay, wine number 2, the Estate Sauvignon Blanc. This is the 2019 Sauvignon Blanc. And let's get some in the glass. Here it is.
So 2019 Sauvignon Blanc. This is actually the highest point on our estate, but also gets thrashed by the wind the most. So the western side of this ranch, or this block, the canes are very short due to the stress of the wind.
Mm-hmm.
See those trees,
kind of a naturally delimiting factor there.
Yeah, and so what's interesting, I think Sauv Blanc, as compared to Pinot Blanc, it buds out later. So we avoid the heat of late August, early September. And this has been picked the last 2 years, third, almost fourth week of September. Sorry, there's some noise in the background.
It's all right, it's all good noise. Wine making noise. We love it. This wine is very lip smacking to me. It's got a real lip smacking quality to it. I think we could say that about, I think we're going to say that about your wines in general. They're very lip smacking.
Thank you. Yeah, so I don't always have inspirations for all the wines I make, but a recent trip to Bordeaux made me fall in love with Bordeaux Blanc in a consumer side, but also a fascination from a winemaking. I feel like Bordeaux Blanc sort of encompasses everything I like in a white wine. Texture, flavor, length, acidity, structure, and so if I have to, Pessac Leon is sort of that area of Sauvignon Blanc is an inspiration for me in terms of an archetype of what I would aspire to.
Right, in terms of your style, your approach to style here. Now you're not a big fan of like multiple styles of fermentation vessels, but you do use oak and stainless steel in this wine, right?
Yep. So 10% of this wine was fermented in new oak, new French oak, and then another 80% or so in neutral barrels, and then the remaining 10% in stainless. And so the idea is we're already kind of on the cooler side of a growing area for Sauvignon Blanc. So I don't really need stainless steel to restrain the aromatics. I'm not worried about that. And the new oak is really there for a textural element. A fascination of mine, other than just winemaking, is understanding cooperages and sort of marrying thoughtful toasting with the right variety. So in Sauvignon Blanc, I don't really need a lot of aromatic influence, but what I'm looking for is length and sort of what I call verve.
Yeah.
The wine really, and then neutral barrels for a white wine to me is the way to go. I like acid, lip smacking wine, so adding a little bit more surly contact with the wine gives me a little option to round out the middle of the palate post fermentation. Whereas I think in the stainless steel tank, it's a little bit harder to get that exposure. Plus a little bit of oxidation, which I think is important, at least during fermentation.
Right, so a little more aerobically, not as reductively. I get a lot of grapefruit on this Sauv, and grapefruit zest kind of for me, but no real apparent secondary from the barrel ferment. So it's just really about texture there, which is I would call it a pretty serious Sauvignon Blanc,
Thank you.
actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's our second year as a winemaking team trying to discover the variety and the style. So it's an evolution, and as we've talked prior, I feel like my winemaking is all about evolution. It's not deciding something prior to actually trying something. You know, having sometimes I think people enter these endeavors with preconceived notions, and then if it doesn't work the first time, they give up, or they say, you know, not a good site. So for us, it's what kind of oak's going to be the best, what kind of vessel is going to give us what we need. Can we adapt in a cooler vintage to less stainless steel, and a warmer vintage maybe more stainless steel, and trying to react in real time versus, you know, creating a recipe and saying that's it.
Right, I hear you. Absolutely. So you're going to take it as it comes, and once you get to know the vineyard, then how much vintage variation have you actually got there? I mean, we're so familiar with what the weather is like where you are because of the frequency with which we see it.
Yeah,
So
I mean, I
would you
think
say that vintage variability is pretty narrow?
I suppose, but I think it's like anything, the more familiar you get with something, the more differences you start, you know, the more you are stare at something, the more you see. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, I think why California has been as successful as it has been as a growing region is somewhat with consistency. But within that, I think 18 and 19, the last two vintages that I've been here, Ramsgate, it's been consistent. Um,
Hmm.
20 is shaping up to be a much different vintage, so we'll see. But I
So
also,
18 and 19, you'd kind of say fairly consistent, but 20, we had some wet weather and
mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think the mark of a good winemaker, whether or not I can put myself in that category, it's not for me to decide. But I think in a challenging vintage, when good wines are still made, I think that's a good indication of a good winemaker. We will see. 2020, I think the hard part is there's been so many variables so far. It's hard to put together the narrative and how that's actually going to influence quality.
all right.
When it comes time
Well,
to,
we'll just we'll take it as it comes, and we'll see what the vintage tastes like when the new wines are released. So right now we're looking at what's in the bottle, and we're looking at the 2018 Ramsgate Pinot Noir.
yep. So this is our estate Pinot. It's coming from multiple blocks off our estate property. Let me get this over here so I can smell it. So Ramsgate was originally planted, previous owner was Roche. So there was original planting back in the 90s, which is in this wine. We also have some younger vines where we would say more current clonal selection, more in vogue in the aught years, California grape growing, so dominated by deep selections. But it's mostly of the older block. So in this particular section of the vineyard, there's a pretty strong delineation in soil. So most of our estate is Diablo clay, which is prevalent around Carneros. But on our very southeastern corner, it turns to gravel, which is about halfway through this block.
Mm-hmm.
So we flagged the rows and we picked based on soil type, which also has a vigor, a variation as well. So you can both look at canopy and look at the ground, depending on if you want to look up or down. And we picked based on that. So what we found is that the clay section of the solar block was a little bit rounder on the palate, but also a little bit more savory, or what I would call sauvage. And
Mm-hmm.
on the gravel side, it was more acid, more tannin, but fruitier. So the lower vigor in the gravel made, more opulent fruit, but it had less stuffing, and the clay was a little bit rounder. which
Yeah.
was pretty interesting. I think the Bordelais have figured that out a long time ago based on Merlot and Cab and gravel and clay. And then our younger blocks are 828 and 2A, and then we have a little bit more coming on, which isn't in this one, the next year.
So this wine's a mashup of these two very different terroirs, kind of in the same
and
blend.
vintage. Yep.
And vine age, older and younger.
Yep. So in 2018, this was our first vintage as a new winemaking team. So I did it out of a necessity to understand the site, but I also did it as a default of how I make wine, which is smaller volumes, smaller lots, dissecting sections of vineyards to educate myself. But I also think when I see variations in the canopy, that often translates to variations in fruits. So anyway, it ended up being 5 different lots. And then as we blended over the 16 months it was in barrel, we gravitated to the gravel section, a little bit of the clay, and a little bit of the young vine.
Showing so well right now, the really very pronounced aromatics. I would say kind of a classic Carneros expression on the fruit. A little bit of cherry, raspberry, you know. getting some spicy kind of black pepper on the finish, which is nice. It's kind of hit of spice. Would you attribute that more to your oak regime or to the fruit?
I would attribute it to both and whole cluster.
Okay, some stems.
Yeah. So, yep, whole cluster to me is another tool in my tool chest. Between being selective on cooperage, also being selective on whole cluster, I feel like during fermentation I have skins and seeds for tannin, but if I include a little bit of stem, I also get stem tannin, which often people think of stems as an aromatic play, but as we talked about in Pinot Blanc, Sauv Blanc, the aromatic play is less important to me. It's more about structure and texture. So I feel like cluster gives this some more umami feeling on the palate, but also gives me a different type of tannin. It also lifts the fruit differently than had it been fully destemmed.
Yeah, I agree. I think the aromatics are very, very apparent here. And I would say the tannin for me, there's plenty of firm tannin here. This is not a shy wine. There's plenty of backbone to have this wine hold up. And this is certainly one I would like to hang on to and see what it does in a couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I'm not in a hurry to enjoy my wine. That's not to say that I don't drink young wine, but me, a hallmark of great wine that I've tasted from other producers is ageability, longevity. When I taste young Burgundy from great producers, there's a tremendous amount of acid and tannin. You can still enjoy them in their youth. However, I think you have to play both sides. I know some customers will open this in a year, and then some will open it in 10 years, and I want to make both people happy.
Oh, I definitely see that happening. I definitely see that happening. And based on the way this wine is showing today, wow, what a treat. What an absolute delight to meet you, Joe, and to learn a little bit more about what you're doing there at Ramsgate and taste these wines. And they have really gotten my attention, and I want to thank you very, very much for them.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. So we'll see you in the 2021 guide.
Wonderful. Thanks for including us.
Bye.
Bye.